Thanks, AJ. And thanks everybody for coming. I know everybody's busy. Wherever you're joining us from, if you're morning, afternoon, or night, I know that it's a sacrifice for you to take an hour of your time out of your day. And I very much appreciate that the hour of your time that you're choosing to take out is related to application security. Definitely my first love when it comes to software engineering, and something that I consider and ostensibly we all know is so very important to the, uh, the safety of our applications and of the people that use them. Um, we're going to talk about multi-factor authentication today. I can't tell you how excited I am. Let's see, actually, I was about to get into it, but I want to do housekeeping first. Of course, if you can't hear me or if you can't see the slides beforehand, I set my font size and my colors to something that I think makes sense and the volume on my mic to something that I think makes sense. But I will be listening attentively for AJ to interrupt me if any of that doesn't if any of that doesn't work. So please raise that concern right away. Throughout, I may or may not see questions. AJ will certainly be looking for effective pause points if there's sort of like an urgent, like, hey, I didn't understand the thing you just did kind of question. But otherwise, I will leave time at the end for questions. So feel free to prepare those, and we can spend some time answering them at the end. Great. Okay, cool. So really excited for multi-factor authentication for a number of reasons. There are a couple of interesting ones. One is that multi-factor authentication is a long time coming. It's a concept that's been in the security community for many years. And to this point, there hasn't been a really good solution inside of the Java space for a framework that can provide that in a simple, expressive, and idiomatic way. And so primarily I'm excited because I get to be one of the I get to have the blessing of having worked on this and offering it to the community to help you do something rather sophisticated inside of your applications with some simple expressive primitives that we have inside of Spring Security. So I'm primarily excited for that reason. It's also a feature that was requested a long time ago. It's one of the longest open issues in Spring Security, where we had like every intent of adding it, and it just takes time for things that are this sophisticated. To give you some perspective, I looked up a couple of fun little events, and the time when multi-factor authentication was being requested, that's the same time when selfie was added to the Oxford Dictionary back in the 2013-2012 timeframe. It's also the time when the hit YouTube meme, What Does the Fox Say, came out and everybody was listening to it and singing along with it. It was also about the time when the Mayan calendar ended and we were all talking about that and what it meant. So that was a long time ago. And there are some really good and important reasons that it was that such a time was needed. One of the main reasons is, and if you've been following Spring Security for a little bit, and its evolution as an API, was an effort that started all the way back in 5.5. And so that is, if I do a little bit of math, it's about 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, when this effort began in earnest to change our APIs in such a way that we could add multi-factor authentication and have it be very simple. And the primary change was to introduce, let me see, I think I have it here, introduce a component called, I think it's in here, it should be, I just need to scroll down far enough. Here we go, Authorization Manager. The Humble Authorization Manager API is one that was introduced a long time ago with the intent of replacing the rest of the Access API in Spring Security. And over time, we've been able to replace those things. A lot of that major work was completed in 5.8, and then 6.0 was about maturing that API to a point that it had enough, bells and whistles might not be the right word, but enough inside of it to be able to introduce something more sophisticated like MFA, which has come out here in 7.0. 7.0 was released on Monday, so this webinar is very timely. You can download this today. It's GA, you can use it. There are samples inside of Spring Security samples that I'll point to you, and we'll build something together today. Multi-factor authentication, to level set with everybody, is essentially the concept that I want to require more than one form of proof from you before I show you or give you access to a given resource. The simplest use case for this is when you're logging in. I want you to give me something you know, like your password, and I want you to prove that you have access to something like your email or your mobile phone or something like that. And if you can tell me something you know and something you have, then we're good. Or if you can tell me something you know, something you have, and something you are, like you can put a fingerprint down on your phone or on whatever device it is that you're using, then I have a higher level of confidence that you are who you say you are. Each of these different dimensions are hard to fake on their own, but even harder to fake in concert with one another, which is why multi-factor authentication is so important to add to applications to ensure the security of your users. So that's what we're going to be doing today. And I'm just curious about something. I'm just going to refresh this because I'm curious. Okay, cool. Let's go ahead and go to Josh's second favorite place on the internet. I have the great blessing of also being named Josh, and so I can also say it's my second favorite place on the internet.
Hey
Which
Josh,
is,
I'm sorry, just one note here. I think on the
yeah,
bottom of your screen it has go to sharing your screen. Can we just hide
yeah.
that?
Is there a way to? Oh, hi. Yeah, sure. For sure. Oh, yeah.
There we go. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Man, look at that. Excellent.
I
Beautiful.
appreciate that. I actually didn't know that that was visible. I thought that was one of the things that the webinar would not transmit. But anyway, that's really good. Thank you. That's helpful for me too, because now that I think about it, it was covering up these two buttons, which would have caused a problem for me too. Great. So we're going to go ahead and use 4.0. Boot is actually releasing today. And so by the end of today or tomorrow, you should be able to follow these same steps if you like and pick 4.0.0 instead of RC2. We'll go ahead and upgrade to Spring Security 7.0 inside of the application when we download it. But for now, let's just go ahead and let's see, an MFA project in Spring Boot, and all of the things look good. So I'll add security and I'll add web, and we're going to keep it really, really simple. We won't have any like UI or anything. Typical security demo, right? And let's see. So we'll just leave it at those two modules. And then let's see. This one I didn't make bigger. So let's move that to here. Okay, cool. Let me make sure that it's just, that was part of me practicing. So let me make sure that that's what I downloaded. 1109, okay, perfect. So there shouldn't be anything inside of this. And then we'll go ahead and go into IntelliJ. This is the final product that you can take a look at if you want after the presentation. Let's see. 1 second. I'm having this little issue. I don't know if other people are having it, where this gets cached somehow. But anyway, so let's see, and let's go this window. Yep. Okay, so this should be empty. There should be nothing running, nothing happening. Okay. All right, good. So we just have a simple application. For those who have used Spring Security before, know a little bit of what I'm about to say. It's a good review though, because these principles are ones that come up no matter where we are in Spring Security. So I like reviewing them. Spring Security, its primary mindset is to have a good set of secure defaults that are still workable for you in an application. So one of the interesting things I think about Spring Security is that it comes with the default user, but not a default password. And the reason for that is if we deployed with the default user and password and it accidentally got deployed to production, now you have like a CVE that you've just released because people could Google like the password or something and get into your system. So for that reason, we generate the password by default, knowing that this is something that you would definitely change. But let's just show that the application is working. Let's see. In fact, well, we'll do that. So it's not very informative because we don't have any pages yet. So of course it gets a 404, but that allows us to demonstrate that security is working, because if I take off the username and password, then I get a 401. So let's go ahead and add an endpoint so we can see that happening. We'll stay here on the command line for just a minute, and then we'll go to the web afterwards. So I'll create just a simple endpoint that just says hello. In a Spring Boot application using Spring Security, you can always get the current authentication as a method parameter inside of your Spring MVC methods. And so if we use it to, if we use it to get the name of the individual, then this is a simple Hello World application in Spring Security. So let's see if we can. Not sure why it didn't give me the little restart. Oh, there we go. Now it's there. Okay. So again, it's still like not letting us in unless we have a username and password. Let's go ahead and get the password. It changes every time. So I'm going to go ahead and capture that. And for anybody that's like, oh, we're going to have to do that every time, worry not. We'll change that out in the next step. Okay, so now we see the user. We have an endpoint. We know that we're authenticating and that Spring Security is correctly getting the user out of the security context and presenting it. Okay, so we'll go ahead and configure our authentication here. And inside of it, we need to add a user. We'll need at least one. We'll have a few by the end. And I just have a little utility to make us faster here so that we can spend more time talking about the features. And this is simply creating a dummy user that we'll use throughout the application. We'll call it Josh, and we'll give him access to the app. This isn't a special name inside of Spring Security. I just like using it because it's short and simple. The idea that the user now has access to the application in general. Then that should be it. Okay, so we start again one more time, and then we'll start talking about MFA. Okay, so now if we do this, it says, nope, sorry, that user, I don't know about them. But if we do Josh password, then it says, hello, Josh. Okay, so this is just single factor authentication. This is something that if you've ever seen a Spring Security demo, you've seen about 1 billion times, or if you've made a Spring Security application or one that uses Spring Security, you've used these components in the past. I'm not going to talk a lot about them, but please feel free to ask if there's some part of it that you're not sure or you're not following quite. In intro Spring Security webinars, I'll talk about what a user detail service is, what user details is, what those things are. I'm going to go ahead and skip those, but please feel free to ask, and I'll answer them when I'm able to. I want everybody to be able to follow along. Okay, cool. So let's see. In Spring Security 7, something important changed. And even before we activate MFA, MFA is not enabled by default. You can see a change, authorities, inside of the user's set of granted authorities. Oops. So when I log in now, you can see that there's the app authority, which I was granting already using the user detail service that we created. But also there's a separate authority now. This is a new authority that's issued inside of Spring Security 7. It's called FactorGrantedAuthority, and it comes with the name of the authority as well as when it was issued. This time is effectively the time at which they logged in using this factor. This is, you can ask the question using this authority, when was the last time that the user gave me their username and password, which will become important a little bit later on. Every time somebody provides some kind of credential, Spring Security will issue an authority that is related to any, I should say, any kind of authentication that Spring Security knows about. Will add the appropriate factor to the security context so that it can be used later on for authorization rules to ask questions like, hey, I can only show this resource if somebody has logged in with their password, or if they've logged in with their password and their and a one-time token or something like that. Okay, so let's go ahead and start enabling multi-factor authentication. With this annotation alone, and by supplying the needed property, multi-factor authentication will be enabled. Multi-factor authentication is enforced in Spring Security at the authorization level because, as you may have already inferred, multi-factor authentication is expressed as a sequence of authorities granted by Spring Security to the user. And you can grant them yourself simply by adding the set of authorities to the authentication object and all of that. However, the underlying concept is the more granted authorities you have, the more factor granted authorities you have, ostensibly, the more access you have to different parts of the application. You're afforded more access given a greater set of authorities. With each authority being granted by a completed authentication mechanism, this was a nice fit for to add multi-factor authentication to Spring Security. So when you supply a set of authorities here, you are effectively, at least for our purposes today, you are specifying the set of authorities that are needed in order to show any resource in the application. When you supply them here, then it is configured globally across the application. All the different kinds of authorities are listed, authority names are listed in FactorGrantedAuthority. And so I can say, I require the password authority, and I require the one-time token authority. And we'll go ahead and, since my font's big, we'll go ahead and make the lines as small as we can. And that's it. At this point in the application, no endpoint, we only have one right now, right? But no endpoint will be visible unless they are allowed or permitted unless the person has both supplied the password authority and a one-time token. Okay, so even though we supplied a password, it says, sorry, you're still not authorized. This isn't super duper informative, obviously. We could change this, give more information as to why. You, the application developer, could obviously create a page or something like that that would give more details. The simplest default is for us to not know how you would want to transmit that to your end user, or if you would want to transmit to your end user. So it just say we just keep it basic like this. But let's go ahead and add something that is going to help us out for this demo. One of the features that was added during this process was a publisher for authorization events. This is similar to the authentication event publisher, just for authorization events instead. Once you publish this, you're able to listen for various events, and that's what I'm going to do right now. So missing factor authorization denied event listener. We'll make it a component, and then we'll use frameworks event listener support denied event to be able to listen just for that event. Whenever authorization is denied, we'll go ahead and log it or something. So if denied.get authorization result, which is essentially the reason why authorization was denied, is an instance of factor authorization decision, then we know that we're going to get some information about the fact that it was that the reason for the denial was based on a set of missing factors. So let's go ahead and let's create a logger. And we'll simply log info missing factors. Oops, where is it? There we go. And then we'll say what were the errors and print those out. Okay, so hopefully this will give us a little bit more information. Whenever something's denied, we can look at the logs and get some information.
Hey, Josh, we received another question.
Yes,
here,
please.
so now's a good time. Said, is a Spring Security Authority referring to the roles or scopes that we're used to seeing as prefixes such as scope or role, or is it a completely new concept?
Excellent question. So yes, all granted authorities that Spring Security issues, and generally speaking, the naming convention that Spring Security follows is to prefix each authority with, just to kind of restate what the person was asking for context for those who don't know this part. Roles are prefixed with role underscore, scopes are prefixed with scope underscore, and factors are prefixed with factor underscore. It is a different object though, and given that question, I'm going to go ahead and open up this class. There is, in Spring Security in 7, there are now 2 implementations of granted authority. Historically, there was only one, and the one was simple granted authority. And this one is special because there's a little bit more information needed when it's a factor, namely when was this factor supplied? At what point did they log in? At what point did they supply it? And so otherwise, it's quite similar to simple granted authority. There's just 2 elements instead of 1, the name of the authority and the time at which it was issued. Otherwise, it's exactly the same. The expectation is that they would all begin with factor underscore. And that's the naming convention I would recommend for you too. If you introduce an authentication mechanism that's your own, that's custom, and you want to add a factor when that authentication is complete, so you can use so that your authentication mechanism can participate in MFA, I would recommend that you call yours factor underscore something as well and use the factor granted authority class. So having said all of that, the short answer is, from a naming convention standpoint, it's exactly the same. But from an implementation standpoint, it's a different class. And you should use factor granted authority if you are issuing authorities yourself and you want those authorities to participate in multi-factor authentication authorization decisions. Great question. Let's see. So if we scroll over here, maybe I can do something a little bit different with that, but we can see that the reason that it was denied was because there was a missing factor. Factor OTT wasn't there, and so I'm denying the request. And of course, the reason that it's not there is because we haven't configured it. The user doesn't have any way to provide it. And so let's do that next. We'll provide our the configuration for our second factor at this point. So I'm going to use another new feature in Spring Security, which is support for modularizing the HTTP security instance. Using this, I can only specify the configuration for one-time token login. This part is not in HTTP security by default. Again, those who are familiar with Spring Security already know that form login and HTTP basic are activated by default. Those are the only 2 authentication mechanisms that are activated. If you want to activate something else, you have to declare it as such. And one of the nice things about this modularization support is that by declaring it this way and declaring my authentication mechanism this way, I don't have to redeclare form login and HTTP basic because those remain as part of the default HTTP security that's going to be generated by Spring Security. When you are configuring one-time token login, we do need one piece of information, which is what do you want us to do once the token is generated? We'll do all the work of generating the token and making sure it's valid and all of that, but we need to know where to send it. And that is via what's called a token generation success handler. Spring Security is great at creating long and descriptive names, right? And since our demo is not precisely about one-time token, I'm just going to keep this very simple. I'm not going to like introduce a Docker image or something that would pretend to be an email server or have it go to some SMS endpoint or whatever. I will just send a redirect to the page that allows me to enter the token, and I will provide the token directly. This is a link that maybe you would normally send via email or text that they could then click that would go to the page, but I'm just going to go redirect there directly, pretending that the user clicked this link or something like that. So At this point, we have everything configured, and we're declaring that every endpoint, regardless of whether it's method security or web security, requires these two, as well as any other rules that we supply, which we will see in a moment. Okay, so we can see that there are two factors displayed because there's two configured. This isn't MFA specific. Anytime you have a multiplicity of factors created, Spring Security web-based factors, Spring Security will put them all on one default login page. It's certainly possible that you might say, hey, you know what, I want to split these pages up and I want to have a page for login and a page for requesting a one-time token. That's, you know, perfectly reasonable. The default page, just for convenience, shows all of them. By the end, we'll have 3, and that might make the page start to look a little cluttered. However, the intent for this page is just to give a quick default page that you can use. It's expected that you'd replace it with something else. And if I log in, oops, then now I'm taken to a secondary login page where it says the factor I'm missing is OTT, and the reason I'm showing you this page is because the factor was missing, which is different than the notion of like it's expired. I need to show it to you because the last time you entered it, it's expired. So now if I click it, it redirects me to this page. Again, at the for the sake of being as clear as I can, this is the link that would probably be in the email or would probably be in the text message or something like that. And when you click it, it comes to a page like this where they can enter it in, or it can be auto-filled out, or whatever it is that you're planning on doing. And when I click that link, then now I'm issued the OTT authority as well. Notice it's at a different time. I was issued password at 28 minutes past the hour, and I was issued the one-time token authority at 29 past the hour. I can ask different questions about when each one of the credentials was provided and use that information to create sophisticated authorization rules in the future. I want to prove to you that, or I want to, well, prove also, but I want to show you that this integrates seamlessly with our authorization rules as we get them, because so far we haven't really declared one yet, right? And the first thing I want to do is I want to add another user. We'll add admin, and we'll say that they have the app permission and the admin permission. I'm going to mention something just because of a question that came in earlier about role. So it is apparent, and you may have seen, especially when it comes to OAuth, we talk about this a lot because there is a little bit of a naming convention that a lot of folks follow with regard to scopes, that when it comes to your existing authorities, if you don't need to use any of the role-based support that Spring Security has, or you don't need to use any of the scope-based support that Spring Security has, then the prefix isn't actually needed. And of course, you could do that with factors as well. If you're like, you know what, this is a factor, but I don't actually need Spring Security's factor-based support. So those prefixes are there to declare provenance and to also be clear about what parts of Spring Security that you're using. And I don't need those right now, and so I'm just leaving them off just for simplicity. Okay, so we have those. Let's go ahead and create another class. And I'll keep just using REST controller so that I don't have to create pages. And we'll state that we'll state our endpoint, and then we'll add a Spring Security annotation called pre-authorize, where we say that this has authority admin, just as you might normally do. And we'll say hello admin. And now we have an endpoint, and this endpoint will be secured by Spring Security after one more configuration, and will only be allowed to those who have been issued the authority of admin. Spring Security, one of the principles that we follow is we want your security to, we want you to declare what your authentication mechanisms is, what your authorization rules are, and so because of that, there isn't very much that Spring Security assumes. We assume a minimal amount of stuff in order for your application to to be effective, to be usable, and otherwise we ask you to please tell us when you want something to happen. And so, for example, enable method security is something that you need to declare, otherwise Spring Security won't honor things like this because you haven't yet told us, yes, I'm going to use method security. You'll notice the same kind of pattern here. Yes, I want to use multi-factor authentication. You're declaring it to us so that we know to configure everything underneath. We don't just want to assume that you're going to be using multi-factor authentication. This pattern helps things, while sometimes can be just a little bit more verbose. This pattern is a nice security pattern that I like and that has been helpful for me over the years to be able to state explicitly, here's the things that I'm doing. You'll see that same kind of pattern throughout all of security. If you've ever done course configuration, love it or hate it, it's nice because you must declare each thing that you're going to allow, and it's easier to see what rules you're enabling because of that. Okay, so method security is on, and now I've got an admin user, right? Excuse me, let's go over to the web now. Again, I can log in, and let's see what happens first with Josh. We'll sign in, and we'll send the token. We've got both, and then we try to go to admin, and it says, sorry, you don't have the admin permission. Okay, so that's probably not super duper surprising. Oops, how come it's not? There we go. Now if we do admin, just opened up our private page so I didn't have to log out. Let's try to do something sneaky. Admin is going to log in using their username. And now let's try going to the admin page. Admin maybe thinks, aha, like because it doesn't say the other two inside of the expression, maybe all I need to do is be an admin and be logged in. That's not the case. Even though I didn't say inside of the expression that I wrote for the pre-authorized annotation that I require OTT and password, those are there implicitly because of the annotation that we declared. So the admin must indeed pass through this other factor in order to get to the admin page. We could have, of course, done that. We could have set it ourselves. You don't actually need the global configuration. You can contemplate how wordy this would get, though, if, oops, has authority and so on, right? Spring Security did introduce to help with this, because sometimes it will be necessary when you're doing things more selectively, but you can say has all authorities and then require them yourself. And then these will appropriately, if multi-factor authentication is activated, take you to the places where you can go gain those factors that you're missing. Okay, but for now we don't need that. Let's see, where should we go next?
We do have another question. We have another question here, Josh. Is good time.
Yeah.
Is it possible to use an OTT issue in the pre-auth?
I don't think I understand the question. Can the person try rewording it? Can we use OTT in pre-auth? I don't think I understand what that means.
Is it possible to use an OTT issue at in the pre-auth?
Yeah, maybe if you can, listener, if you can describe a little bit more what you mean by pre-auth, then I can probably answer your question. That refers specifically in my brain to a different authentication mechanism, pre-authenticated authentication provider, which is usually for like X509 and other things that are outside of the container. It has a very specific meaning. And because of that, I don't want to misunderstand your question. I think it's a good question and a reasonable question. I just want to make sure that I can clearly gather what you're asking about.
Did it clarify issue at attribute?
An issued attribute? I'm sorry, I still don't think I understand what you are. So each authority does have an issued out property inside of it. The FactorGrantedAuthority has the notion of it being issued at. Maybe maybe if you could word it in a way that says what you're trying to achieve more broadly in your application, then I'd understand a little bit better. But sorry, I don't yet understand what you're asking. Let me go ahead and move on, and then I'm sure that that individual will ask again. Okay, great. So we might not want to, just as I was alluding to earlier, we might not want to declare everything globally. We may instead want to issue it conditionally, programmatically. There may be cases where we only want the subset of users that has opted into it. We only want admins to have to do it. We want to do certain things at a certain time, like I only need OTT if they, I need it again if they haven't supplied it to me in the last minute or so. There are lots of different ways that we might care to apply these rules in other programmatic kind of ways. So actually, let's take this opportunity to dig into what this annotation is doing. So when you supply this annotation and you give it authorities, if you've given it authorities, which is very common, just like we did earlier, it pulls up this, it uses this configuration to add an authorization manager factory bean, specifically the default authorization manager factory. This bean is one that HTTP security uses, the authorized HTTP requests DSL uses, and it's one that method security uses as well. When you declare a bean of type object, then both of them pick it up. If you declare a bean of type method invocation, for example, then it will only happen for methods. And if you do one for request authorization context, then it will happen only for web requests. But quite often I find myself declaring object because I want it to be used for both, which is what happens by default, default in that configuration object as well. The basics of Authorization Manager Factory are that all the different authorization rules that you're familiar with that are both inside method security and inside of web security are available to you in one single component that then can be configured across both of them. So we get a lot out of this, out of introducing multi-factor authentication, including a way to, in a unified way, represent authority across both authorization boundaries. And the default implementation, all it does is it forwards onto our default rules, whatever they are, and then allows you to add some additional authorization. So exactly what that annotation is doing is it's saying, hey, use the default authorization manager factory that both web security and method security are now using. And also for each authorization rule that you create, please add these things. And so it's creating an authorization manager that is checking for factor OTT and factor password. And so let's do that ourselves. And then we'll replace it with some other things. In fact, let's just close all of this. So I'm going to declare an authorization manager factory. I'll just call it MFA. We'll use that throughout. And then actually, let me just do one more thing. Let me show you what I mean by that authorization manager that I was referring to. So authorization manager is the thing that takes in an authentication in any other context and makes a decision, an authorization decision. You saw it when we added the event listener where it was looking at factor authorization decision. If it's one that's based on factors, then I want to print it out to the screen, to the logs. So we can create an authorization manager programmatically and then state that that needs to be applied to all authorization rules that are created both in web security and method security. Effectively, this is the programmatic way of doing the same thing that the annotation does when you supply authorities here. So I'll go ahead and say it, password authority and OTT authority. Note that if I have a multiplicity of authorities, then this is the order in which they're asked for by default. So if I now take that bean, pick it up, and I create an authorization manager factory, then I can tell it, please use this as additional authorization. Oops. By publishing this bean and by not supplying any authorities here, web security and method security will pick up this bean instead. That means that effectively this is the exact same thing that we did. This is what the annotation is doing for you when you supply authorities. Is it's taking those authorities, creating an authorization manager, and setting the additional authorization for the default authorization manager factory. So let's, shall we try putting this to use? Should we, actually, let's make sure that things still work, huh? Make sure we didn't break anything. Because that would be a bummer if we went into more sophisticated stuff and I had just broken something. Okay, let's just make sure that Josh still requires both authorities, and it is. It's required that Josh log in with both the password and an OTT. And we can do a multiplicity of authorities here as well. Let me see, how much time do we have here? There are two things I would love to show you if we have time, and then the rest I'll invite you to look at the documentation because I don't think we'll get to everything today. One I want to show you is, let's imagine, so we've looked at one MFA case, and another that I want to show to you is time-based authorization. Time-based authorization says they can see this so long as they've given it to me in the last minute or something like that. And there are some endpoints that may require that. There are others that may not. We probably don't want people to be putting in their one-time token every 5 minutes on the site as a whole, but it's also reasonable for us to say, hey, when you go to the profile page, I need you to give that to me again if you haven't given it to me real soon, like in the last minute or something like that. So let's create a profile page. Let's see. We'll just keep this simple for a second. Forgive me for going a little quick on like the MVC stuff. Let's see. And we'll go even quicker here and just have something really simple. Want to make sure that I can make this point. So for the profile page, we might say that we still need multiple factors, but there's one of them that's more time sensitive, and we need you to give us the one-time token. We need you to give us the one-time token sooner if you have if you want to go to this page, we need it within the last, say, minute or something like that. So we'll go ahead and publish the authorization configuration for this object, for this component. And say, now this also demonstrates how it's slightly different from method security. We'll go ahead and declare a web authorization rule that says if the request matches profile, then we want to, we'll just say authenticated for a moment, but what we want to do is we want to have this be something different. We want it to be not just authenticated, but we want it to be authenticated within a, within a minute or so. So when thinking about thinking about this from an API standpoint, just thinking about principles in Spring Security, we know authorization managers are the things that make authorization decisions. So if I want to require something within a certain number of minutes, that's an authorization manager. And so Spring Security has an authorization manager that can help you with that. You can see here that, let me see if I can make this a little bit easier to read. I can create the notion of, I can talk about a factor requirement in terms of an object. It's called required factor. And I say, what is the authority that I care about? And what is its expiry window? You can think about the same thing with scopes and with other things, not just with factors, but for the purpose of authentication, this object is specifically for factor-based authorities. And then we take the authorization manager that supports required factors, we supply the required factor, and we publish it. This authorization manager is one that will fail if the factor OTT factor, if that's the one we supply here in the method, hasn't been granted in the last minute. It will check that issue, that value, and then fail accordingly. So let's go ahead and create an instance of one of those. Let's see, OTT within 1 minute. There we go. Okay. With that in place, and by getting the global authorization manager factory, I can combine these two to create a more sophisticated rule. All the rules need to apply, right? That's what I'm saying here, is all the rules need to apply. I need them to have their password. I need them to apply OTT. Additionally, though, I need them to also supply it within the last minute. And so let's express those together. Instead of using authenticated, I'll use access, because access is the thing that allows us to generate a fully constructed authorization manager. And I'll say MFA authenticated, because that's what we're doing. We just replaced that, right? Authenticated with MFA.authenticated. And we'll say that it needs to happen within 1 minute. So we'll see if we can simplify this a little bit if we have time for it. I think we're right at the tail end, so I'm going to privilege one other thing that I want to show you, but let's take a look at this guy. Or prioritize. I want to prioritize one other thing if we can, if we have time. And I always tell myself, of course, if there's enough interest, then we can always do another webinar. There's nothing that prevents us from talking more about this if there's lots of questions and lots of interest. Okay, so let's try to go to the profile page. We're, of course, asked to give our information. Okay, so we see the profile page because we've seen it in the last minute, right? And now I have to think of something to say for a minute while we're waiting. So let's come over here and talk a little bit about this right here. One of the interesting things about, another one of the interesting features in Spring Security 7 that came out is the ability in your spell expressions to return an authorization manager. And that simple idea makes so that I can use this same method inside of my spell expressions. If I publish it as if I publish something as a bean that returns, that has this method inside of it, I can use this same expression and it will look very similar to this right here inside of my, what am I saying? Inside of my spell expressions in my pre-authorized annotations, which is a pretty cool feature that's there in the demo, but I don't think I'll be able to show it. The point I want to make right now is that it might seem like, wait, this is buried deep inside of like a component inside of this application, Josh. That doesn't seem particularly modular, especially if I need to use it somewhere else inside of spell expressions. But because Method Security knows how to read these as well now, which is the new feature in Spring Security 7. You can publish something that you can publish a bean that contains this method, and both your Method Security and your web security can call those. So I won't have time to demo that today. Let's see if that was enough time. I wasn't keeping track of the time. I should have. Maybe someone else was keeping track of the time. Great. So we can see that because it's been more than a minute, I'm now redirected and it says, I need your OTT, and the reason is because it's expired. This is important information from you when you're rendering a UI, and you might want to render it differently. You might want to tell the user, hey, I need you to hand your one-time token to me again because, because it's been too long or something like that. So now if I send the token again, I'm able to see the profile page at this point. Okay, cool. Let's see. AJ, I'm just going to ask you, is there like a backlog of questions right now? Are there lots of
I do have
questions?
a couple questions.
Yeah, let's go ahead and answer
Yes,
questions. And if there's
sure.
time, I'll show you one last feature. But if not, then we'll have made sure to get to questions.
Well, we've already had some requests to have you brought on for part two, Josh,
Okay,
so
sure thing.
we may
Be
have to
happy.
do that.
Yeah,
Let's just get back to one of the first questions that were asked that I think the the person who asking gave more
yeah.
clarification on. This is for the
Okay.
OTT issue for pre-auth. The question is, for example, or the clarification is, for example, GitHub has pages where, after authentication and a one-time token, users are required to enter another OTT before performing sensitive operations on the platform. If the previous OTT is older than 10 minutes, the user must verify again before the action can proceed. This is often used when modifying platform settings. Amazon uses similar UI patterns.
Awesome. Cool. All right. So hopefully that question got answered. That was kind of serendipitous. So
Yes.
that means that the
Yeah.
user was really tracking very well where we were headed. So I'm really happy to have been able to show you that feature. And frankly, I had two to pick right then, and so I'm glad I picked that one instead of the other feature because it hopefully addresses your question. Feel free to follow up with another if not, um, if that doesn't answer it. So great question.
Another question here is the demo source code going to be available for later
Yep.
so
I
they
will
can
show
try it
you
out? And then,
I will show you that right now. So it's available here. Let me make this a little bigger, font a little bit bigger. Um, my username is JZHEAUX, which is a long story. I'm happy to tell you one day, a long funny story about how I got that handle. And the name of the repository is Tanzu-MFA-November-2025. And it's broken up into individual commits. So you can see each feature that I added, like so. Let's see, I think we got to this point right here. And I was thinking about skipping it to get to this one because I really wanted to show WebAuthn because I think it's kind of cool what kinds of things you can do that just make that more interesting. But yeah, so we got to we got to right about here, and then the rest are there for you to check out. So please do take a look at the repository.
maybe we can include the link in the post email as well.
Oh, I love that
Sorry.
idea. Yeah, please
Yeah,
do
let's
that.
do that.
Okay.
And there are some other questions about documentation as well for reference. So I think this is a great place to start and to look at.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Okay, yeah. So I recommend that you go here I'm going to give you two places. One, the reference documentation, you'll see it underneath servlet applications, authentication, multi-factor authentication. There are still some architectural considerations that we're covering with regard to method security in reactive. So it's not yet supported in reactive for that specific reason. We want to make sure that when we release it, all of the major aspects of Spring security work as you might expect, and not tell you have to do this super special thing for reactive method security or whatever. So that's why it's just servlet for now. And then the other place that I would point you to is Spring Security Samples. This is a repo that Spring Security has maintained for the last few years. Oops, Spring Security. Oh yeah, sorry, Spring Projects. This is a repo that Spring Security has maintained for some time now, and it has a number of MFA demos that were added for 7.0 right here. And so there are 3 here that are of particular interest. These are combinations that the community asked for. If there are other combinations that you would like to see, let me know. Log an issue here in the sample. I'm happy to put one together to help you see the idiomatic or intended way to use it, especially if there's one that's like hard to figure out because there's always going to be corner cases that maybe we didn't anticipate. But the one that an example that represents some of what we created today is this one where you log in with the username and password and with a one-time token. There's also one where you use a certificate and a password, and there's one where you use a certificate and you use WebAuthn. So I think those are really cool. This one is just a little bit more experimental, but it demonstrates the idea of being able to use the underlying components, the factor-based components, to work with scopes. And for example, if a user granted a subset of scopes and now they go to an endpoint that requires a scope that they haven't granted yet, then this this sample redirects back to, I think this one just works with Google, but it redirects back to the Google Chooser page, so you can click that checkbox as well. So but this one is a bit more experimental than the other ones. So that's the second place I would point you to, is these different ones. Each one has a README for how to use it. And depending on the kind of learner that you are, whether you like to get your hands dirty right away, see how it's working, go through the stack traces and stuff like that, or you want to start with something and tweak it to see what else you can make it do, or you want to start here with reference documentation. This is a quick swath at it. We will just like everything, we'll be improving the documentation over time, but a number of the features that I went over today, including some others that we didn't, are all listed here, and would love to get your feedback on that as well. So those are the two places I'd point you to learn more about it.
Thanks, Josh. There's a few other questions here. I know that we're running close to time. One of the questions was, this was prompting for a part 2, but just asking about using third party like Okta for multi-factor authentication.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, for sure. So there's a couple of things to think about. The answer is yes. There's just things that we haven't covered yet. One is that inside of the DSL, there is a way for you to specify, here's how you go get the authority that's missing, the factor that's missing, right? And so if one of your factors is Okta, and we choose to say, hey, we're going to have it, just so it's very clear, we're going to call the factor Okta, then you can go ahead and supply that inside of the DSL and say, hey, if factor Okta is required and they're missing it, here's how you go get it. And you can totally describe like you configure what's called an authentication entry point to describe how to go back to Okta. However, it can also be simpler than that. There is a factor for authorization code. And so that one's already configured, and it already integrates with OAuth 2 login. So whatever you have configured in Spring Security for OAuth 2 login, whether it's Okta or something else, it will redirect you to that experience, whether you have a custom page or using Spring Security's defaults, just like what we already saw. So, so I encourage you to take a look at that. One sample that I don't think we have yet is an X509 certificate plus OAuth. That's one that's been requested. Take a look at that one when it comes out. But otherwise, the concepts are the same. I can either require factor authorization code as one of my factors, or you can create a custom one if you need it to be more direct or more specialized to exactly what Okta is doing. So the second answer to your question is a pattern that Spring Security is working towards, that authorization server is working towards, the authorization server, Spring Authorization Server does not yet support, is the ability to use multi-factor authentication in the authorization server for like the authorized endpoint, the OAuth 2/authorized endpoint. So that's something that is something that is being looked at. There are ways to make it work, but we want to make it, a lot simpler than it is right now. And in that case, if you are, for example, redirecting to an authorization server that's using multi-factor authentication, that's a pattern that we strongly recommend, where authorization server might be asking for a multiplicity of things and like not issuing the authorization code until all of those are presented. And then they go to a relying party, which is not using MFA in that case, because it was relying on the identity provider to do all of that work. So, so that's another, obviously there's a lot to unpack there to understand all of that, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of guidance and also incentive for me to add that sample so that folks can see how it plays with OAuth 2.
It looks like that is about the time that we have. There are a few other questions. Maybe we'll respond via email, and then maybe we'll bring you back on for part 2, Josh. But I'd like to give you the floor if you have any closing comments before we wrap up.
I would, good. I would just encourage you to take a look at this demo. I'll give a little teaser. It demonstrates how to add SSL to the application, how to use WebAuthn, how to create user-based authorization. When you think about it, people often opt in or there may be early adopters that are starting to use OTT in your application, but not everybody does. So how do I create authorization rules that anticipate that? We do have a component that actually helps with some of the simpler use cases, where again, just a subset of users has opted in, but no one else has. And then finally, this last commit demonstrates how to do the thing that I promised earlier, which is, well, how do I declare my time-based stuff or other kinds of custom things in such a way that they're available to multi-method security and web security, and what does that look like? So I encourage you to take a look at those if those are use cases that you're interested in, and please reach out to me. I'm on Blue Sky, and obviously I'm looking at issues all the time on Spring Security and Spring Security samples. So thanks, and let's keep in touch.
Great, thank you, Josh. Again, I think we may have to bring you on for part two. We will send out a post-event email. It will have the recording of this presentation as well as all the links that we were showing here today that Josh had covered. So I do want to say a special thank you to Josh for your time, for this great presentation, for the next presentation in the future. We loved having you on here, Josh, and for everyone who was in attendance, whether you're watching live or in the future on demand. Thank you for attending. Thank you for all of the great questions, and we hope to see you guys at our next event. Happy holidays, everybody, and stay safe. Bye all.